I've been driving for Uber for a while now. It's not exactly the dream job I pictured for myself back when I was younger, but hey, it pays the bills. It keeps a roof over my head and food on the table, and at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? The job itself is pretty simple: drive, pick up, drop off, repeat. Night after night, it's the same routine. Over time, I've met just about every kind of passenger you can imagine. Some are chatty, spilling their life stories like we've been buddies for years. Others sit there dead silent, glued to their phones or staring out the window like they're in another world. And then there are the weird ones, the kind that make you wonder how they even make it through a normal day. Most of the time, though, it's just your average, uneventful rides. Nothing too out of the ordinary. That night, I was wrapping up another ride and getting ready to call it a day when a new request popped up on my screen. I glanced at the pickup location, a modeling agency downtown. Honestly, it didn't faze me. I've picked people up from all kinds of places: nightclubs, hospitals, even late-night office buildings. A modeling agency wasn't exactly the strangest thing I'd seen. Without giving it much thought, I accepted the ride, made a U-turn, and headed that way. A few minutes later, I pulled up to the curb outside the building. My headlights lit up the entrance as I put the car in park and waited. It didn't take long before the door swung open, and there she was. She stepped out with this natural grace that only people who belong in front of a camera seem to have. She was stunning, one of those people you don't just glance at and forget. High cheekbones, big, expressive eyes, and this air of elegance that screamed high-fashion model. And now that I thought about it, she probably was. But what really caught my attention wasn't just her looks. It was the way she moved. She looked completely drained, like she'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders all day. As she walked toward the car, she let out this long, heavy sigh, like she'd been holding her breath for hours. She opened the door, slid into the back seat, and immediately leaned her head back, like she'd finally found a moment to breathe. "Leah?" I asked, just to make sure I had the right person. She gave me a small nod, rubbing her temples like she was trying to push away a headache. "Yeah, sorry. Long day," she muttered. "No worries," I replied, tapping the screen to start the ride. The car hummed to life as I pulled away from the curb and merged into the late-night traffic. For the first few blocks, she didn't say a word. She just leaned back, closing her eyes for a few seconds, her breathing slow and steady. I figured she wasn't in the mood to talk, and I wasn't about to be one of those drivers who forces small talk on someone who clearly needs a break. But then, out of nowhere, she let out a little laugh. I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of her faint smile. "What's funny?" I asked, genuinely curious. She opened her eyes slowly, her lips curling into a smirk as she let out an exaggerated sigh. "This whole day," she said, shaking her head. "Non-stop posing, endless outfit changes, making sure every little detail is perfect. Trying to look," she lifted her hands and made air quotes, "effortlessly flawless." She exhaled, slumping slightly against the seat. "And now, after all that, I've officially reached the final stage, an exhausted mess in the back of an Uber." I couldn't help but laugh, glancing at her as she stretched her arms dramatically. "Well, at least you made it," I teased. "The last stage of the day." She shot me a tired but playful grin. "Yeah, the barely functioning human stage. What started as casual small talk, the kind of conversation you have just to fill the silence, turned into something different." There was something about her that stood out. She wasn't just another model, at least not in the way you'd expect. She wasn't distant or full of herself. Instead, she was sarcastic, quick-witted, and surprisingly down-to-earth. She spoke with this ease that made it clear she wasn't just going through the motions. She was genuinely engaged, laughing at herself, not filtering her words, and had this raw charm that made it impossible not to enjoy talking to her. The minutes flew by without either of us noticing. 15 minutes felt more like 5. And by the time we were nearing her place, I realized I wasn't ready for the ride to end just yet. There was something about the way the conversation flowed that made it feel like we'd known each other longer than just a car ride. Then, as if the universe had its own plans, something unexpected happened. A single raindrop splattered against the windshield, followed by another. Within moments, the sky opened up, and heavy sheets of rain came crashing down, drenching the city in an instant. The streetlights shimmered through the water-streaked glass, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the roof filled the car. Leah groaned dramatically, tilting her head to look out the window. "Oh, perfect. And of course, I forgot my umbrella," she said, shaking her head, half laughing, half exasperated. As I slowed the car in front of her building, I glanced at her. Want me to pull right up to the entrance? Minimize the damage? She hesitated, biting her lip like she was debating something. For a second, she just watched the rain, her fingers drumming lightly against her knee. Then she turned back to me, a thoughtful glint in her eyes. You know, she said slowly, there's a little cafe just around the corner. If you're not in a rush, want to wait out the rain over a coffee? I don't usually say yes to things like that, last-minute plans, spontaneous detours. But something about this moment felt different, like a small shift in the night that was worth following. So, this time, I did. I nodded, turning the wheel and pulling into the parking lot of the little cafe. The rain drummed against the windshield as I put the car in park. Leah glanced over at me, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She still looked tired, but there was something amused in her expression, like she knew we were about to turn a simple Uber ride into something else entirely. So, she said, unlocking the door, coffee it is, then. I wasn't entirely sure what had compelled me to agree to this, but for some reason, I didn't feel the need to question it either. It was one of those moments where logic took a back seat, and instinct quietly took the wheel. There was no carefully laid out plan, no deep consideration, just a feeling that, for whatever reason, this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Even if I couldn't quite put my finger on why, I followed her out of the car. The cool evening air hit us, carrying that fresh, earthy smell of rain-soaked pavement. The streets were mostly quiet, except for the occasional car splashing through puddles. The warm glow from the cafe spilled out onto the sidewalk, a sharp contrast to the damp, chilly night. Without thinking twice, I trailed her inside, where the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans hit me like a warm hug. It was the kind of smell that made you want to stay a while, wrapping you in comfort like an old, familiar blanket. The cafe itself was cozy and intimate, with dim lighting that cast a soft golden glow over the wooden tables and worn-out chairs. A handful of people were scattered around, their low murmurs blending with the quiet hum of the espresso machine. Rain tapped steadily against the large windows, adding a soothing rhythm to the atmosphere. Leah led the way to a small table tucked into the corner by the window, the perfect spot to watch the storm roll through the city. As we sat down, I took a moment to soak it all in. The warmth of the space, the gentle clinking of ceramic cups, the way the candle on our table flickered with every draft. She ordered a cappuccino, her voice calm and unhurried, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. I went with a black coffee, something simple, something grounding. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, both of us watching the rain blur the neon signs outside into streaks of color. It felt like the world outside had faded away, like we were in our own little bubble, separate from everything else. Eventually, I broke the silence. So, what do you do when you're not being a model? I asked, keeping my tone light and curious. She let out a soft laugh, one that carried a hint of self-deprecation. I wish I had some fascinating, mysterious answer for you, but honestly, it's mostly just work. She stirred her cappuccino absently before continuing. My days are spent in front of cameras, pretending to be someone I'm not. Different clothes, different looks, different personas. But at the end of the day, it's still just me underneath it all. She paused, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window like she was searching for the right words. It's funny, though. People see the photos, the magazine covers, the runway shows, and they think it's this glamorous, effortless life. They see perfection. But the truth is, I'm just a regular girl, exhausted most of the time, trying to figure things out like everyone else. There was something raw in the way she said it, an honesty that felt both rare and fragile. I could see it in her eyes, that quiet struggle between wanting to be understood and the instinct to keep parts of herself hidden. She wasn't supposed to say things like this. She wasn't supposed to admit to doubt, to exhaustion, to uncertainty. And yet, here she was, letting me see a glimpse of the real her. Don't sell yourself short, I said, leaning forward a little. I'm sure being a model is way harder than it looks. The pressure alone must be insane. She shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Yeah, but it's part of the job. People only see the final product, the perfect shot, the flawless image. They don't see the hours of work, the exhaustion, the constant need to be on. It's like you become this product, this brand. And sometimes, I don't even know where the real me fits into all of it. She let out a breath, like she was releasing a thought that had been weighing her down. And honestly, I don't know if I want to keep doing it forever. We fell into another comfortable silence, sipping our drinks as the rain kept up its steady rhythm outside. It was strange how time seemed to slow in moments like this. I'd only known her for a short while, but sitting across from her felt familiar, like we'd already shared years of conversations like this. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Do you think we'll ever figure it all out? I glanced at her, tilting my head slightly. Figure what out? She let out a soft sigh, a small, wistful smile playing on her lips. Life. Where we're supposed to be. What we're supposed to be doing. Any of it. There was something both hopeful and resigned in the way she said it, like she wanted to believe there was an answer but wasn't entirely sure if one existed. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let her words hang in the air, mingling with the steam rising from our coffee cups. She smiled again, but this time it was tinged with something bittersweet. Sometimes, I feel like I'm just going through the motions. For a moment, as the rain blurred the world outside, I understood exactly what she meant. Hell, I felt the same way half the time. I wasn't living some exciting, glamorous life. I drove Uber day in and day out, just to make ends meet. And I'd had my fair share of days where I felt stuck, like I was on a treadmill going nowhere. I think we all feel that way sometimes, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Maybe we're not meant to have all the answers right now. Maybe we just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time. She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. Her smile softened. I like that idea. It's nice, talking to someone who gets it. We sat there for a while longer, and I could feel a shift in the air between us. The rain had slowed, but the conversation hadn't. It wasn't just two strangers passing time anymore. We were connecting. It wasn't about the coffee, or the rain, or the fact that we were stuck in a small cafe waiting for the storm to pass. It was about something deeper, something I didn't quite understand yet but knew I didn't want to end. The rain had finally stopped, and the cafe, which had felt like a safe haven for the last hour, was no longer needed. We stood up from the table, our coffee cups now empty, but the conversation lingered in the air between us. So, should we head out? I asked, glancing at her as she grabbed her purse. Leah nodded, her eyes twinkling with a kind of mischief I hadn't noticed before. Yeah, I guess so. I wouldn't want to keep you here forever, she said with a teasing smile, though there was something behind it I couldn't quite place. I walked with her out of the cafe, the cool night air hitting my face. It felt refreshing after the warmth of the rain and the conversation we'd shared. We both stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. She glanced down the street, where the wet pavement shimmered under the streetlights, before turning back to me. I know this is kind of random, she started, hesitating for a second, but would you like to walk with me for a bit? I'm not really ready to go home yet. I was caught off guard. This wasn't how things usually went. Usually, after a ride, the passenger would just hop out and go on with their life. But something about Lisa felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I found myself nodding. Sure, let's walk. We strolled slowly down the street, side by side, in a comfortable silence. The city felt quieter than usual, like the rain had washed away all the noise. We passed closed-up shops and quiet apartment buildings. Every now and then, Lisa would point something out, an interesting cafe, a quirky bookstore, and I'd nod or share my thoughts. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it felt easy, like I was just walking with an old friend. So, where are you from? I asked, breaking the silence. I mean, I know you're a model, but I don't think you're from around here. She glanced over at me, smiling. I'm originally from a small town upstate. It's not exactly the big city, but I came here for work. My mom was a model too, and I guess I kind of followed in her footsteps. But I don't know, sometimes I wish I hadn't. I could hear the regret in her voice, but she tried to brush it off with a laugh. It's weird, All these people tell me I should be happy to have the life I do, but sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. I stopped for a second, taking in what she said. I'd always heard people talk about the glamorous side of modeling, the photo shoots, the fame, the parties. But this side of it, the exhaustion, the loneliness, was something I'd never really considered. I get it, I said, my voice softer than usual. Sometimes the dream job is just that, a dream. It doesn't always live up to what people expect. She met my gaze then, and for a moment, there was a kind of understanding between us. Yeah, she agreed, her voice quiet. But that doesn't make it any easier. We kept walking, and I found myself wanting to know more about her life beyond the glamorous photo shoots and runways. There was more to her than just a pretty face, and for the first time, I realized I wanted to get to know that person. Eventually, we reached a small park. The benches were empty, and the air smelled fresh and earthy. It felt like a moment frozen in time, just the two of us, away from everything. Lisa sat down on one of the benches, and I followed, sitting down beside her. So, she began, glancing at me with a curious expression. What about you? What's your story? I wasn't used to being asked about myself, especially by someone like her, but for some reason, I felt comfortable. I'm just a regular guy, I guess, I said. I drive Uber. It's not exciting, but it pays the bills. I don't know. I'm still figuring things out. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's funny, isn't it? How we all feel like we're just figuring things out, no matter what stage we're at. I didn't have an answer for that. I just looked at her, realizing that we both had more in common than I expected. Maybe we weren't so different after all. The conversation shifted, and we talked about everything and nothing, our dreams, our fears, and the things we still wanted to do with our lives. It wasn't a deep, life-changing conversation, but it was real. And in that moment, it felt like the most important thing in the world. After a while, Lisa stood up, stretching her arms above her head. Well, I guess I should get going, she said, her smile warm. Thanks for hanging out. It's been nice. I stood too, reluctant to let the moment end. Yeah, it was really nice. We walked back to where we'd parked, and I couldn't help but feel a pull inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just a casual encounter anymore. Something was building between us, something unexpected, something neither of us had planned. As we reached the car, Lisa gave me a small smile, the kind that seemed to say everything without saying anything at all. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something I hadn't planned for and didn't quite understand. So, this is me, she said, gesturing to the building in front of us. It was a fancy apartment complex, the kind that made you feel like you had to have a good reason to be there. But Lisa didn't seem like someone who cared about appearances. I nodded, suddenly feeling like I didn't want to leave. Yeah, well, I guess this is it, then, I said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Lisa paused for a moment, then turned toward me, her expression softening as if she was considering something. You know, you're the first person I've talked to like this in a long time, she said quietly, her voice almost hesitant. I mean, really talk to. It's nice to just be normal, you know? There was something in her eyes, a vulnerability, something raw, that made me feel like I shouldn't let her leave yet. I didn't know why, but I didn't want this moment to end. Same here, I admitted. I've met a lot of people in my job, but it's never been like this. It's easy, I guess, talking to you. She smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. I know what you mean. It's kind of rare, isn't it? I agreed with a nod, but the moment was brief. Lisa took a deep breath, and I could see she was about to say something else, but then she stopped herself. Well, I guess I should go inside, she said, hesitating for a moment before adding, but if you want, you could come up for a drink. Just to, you know, keep talking. I don't know. I mean, you've been pretty cool to hang out with. Her words hung in the air for a moment, and I felt my heart skip a beat. She wasn't just offering a casual drink. There was something more in her tone, something different. She wasn't asking me to leave, and the way she looked at me made me feel like this wasn't just about a quick coffee or a polite invitation. I wasn't sure what to say. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. Part of me was hesitant, unsure of whether this was just a momentary impulse on her part or something more. But another part of me, something deeper, wanted to say yes. I looked at her, searching her eyes for any sign of hesitation. You sure? I asked, my voice uncertain. Yeah, she said with a soft laugh. I'm sure. I don't bite, promise. She smiled again, this time with a spark in her eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, and I found myself nodding before I even realized it. All right, I'll come up for a drink. Lisa grinned, her excitement barely contained. Great, let's go. We walked into the building together, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the quiet lobby. She led me up to her apartment on the top floor, and I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she moved, how comfortable she seemed in this space that I knew was far beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The apartment was beautiful, modern, sleek, the kind of place that made you feel like you were in a high-end movie. But despite all the luxury, Lisa didn't seem fazed by any of it. She took her jacket off and tossed it on the couch casually. She turned to face me, a casual smile on her lips. Make yourself at home, she said, gesturing to the couch. I'll grab some wine. I sat down, trying not to let the overwhelming sense of unease get to me. I wasn't sure why, but I felt like I didn't belong in a place like this. It was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that I was out of my depth. Lisa came back a minute later, 2 glasses of red wine in hand. She handed one to me before sitting down beside me. We clinked glasses, and for a moment, Everything seemed perfect. The conversation flowed easily, almost as if we'd known each other for years, not just a few hours. We talked about the things that mattered, the things that didn't, and everything in between. The tension that had been there earlier had melted away, and it felt like we were just two people enjoying each other's company. After a while, she spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. "What are you really looking for? I mean, I know we're just talking, but you don't seem like the kind of guy who just does this kind of thing for fun. So, what is it for you?" I looked at her, unsure of how to answer. To be honest, I hadn't really thought about it. But when she asked, I realized I didn't want this to be a one-off thing. Something about her made me want more. "I guess I'm looking for something real," I said, the words coming out before I even had a chance to think. "I don't want to just float through life. I want something that actually means something, even if it's not perfect." Lisa's eyes softened, and she gave me a knowing smile. "Yeah, I get that." In that moment, I realized she understood me more than anyone I'd ever met. I could feel the shift in the air between us, a kind of unspoken connection that had started to grow ever since we sat down in the cafe. The more we talked, the clearer it became that there was something deeper here, something neither of us could ignore, even if we tried. Lisa and I spent the next hour talking about everything, from trivial matters to personal stories that made us laugh, then pause and reflect. She told me about her struggles in the modeling world, the constant pressure to look perfect, the loneliness of living in a city where everyone was a stranger, and the feeling of being just another face in the crowd. It was easy to listen to her, to really hear what she was saying, because somehow, I knew exactly what she meant. I'd spent years driving people around, watching their lives unfold in the back seat of my car, but I never felt like I was a part of their world, just a passenger on the sidelines. Lisa was different. She made me feel like I wasn't just an observer anymore, like I had a real place in this story. "So, tell me more about you," she said, setting her glass of wine down. "What makes you tick, Richard? What do you want in life?" I shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I wasn't used to being asked questions like this, especially by someone like her. I glanced at her, seeing the genuine curiosity in her eyes. She wasn't just being polite, she actually wanted to know. I took a deep breath and leaned back against the couch, my thoughts swirling. "I don't know," I said. "I guess I want more than what I've got. I mean, I drive people around all day. I've met a ton of people, but it feels like I'm just passing through their lives. I've never had something that really mattered to me." Lisa listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine. "That's tough," she said softly. "But I think you can change that. I mean, life's short. You deserve something more than just being a part of someone else's story." Her words struck a chord with me more than I'd expected. I wasn't sure why, but hearing her say that made me feel like maybe there was hope for me after all. Maybe I wasn't destined to just drift through life. "I think you're right," I said quietly, looking at her. "Maybe I need to stop letting life just happen to me and start doing something about it." Lisa smiled, her face lighting up with that same warmth that had drawn me in earlier. "That's the spirit," she said, her voice full of encouragement. "You just need to take the leap, Richard. Don't be afraid to go after what you really want." I didn't say anything, but inside, something was clicking into place. The words she was saying, the way she looked at me, it was all starting to feel like more than just a conversation. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want this moment to end. "So, tell me about your dreams," I asked, my voice a little softer than usual. "What's the one thing you wish you could do if you could do anything?" Lisa looked away for a moment, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. She ran her fingers through her hair, a nervous gesture I hadn't seen before. She seemed hesitant, like she was holding something back. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've spent so much of my life chasing other people's dreams. I guess I've forgotten what mine are. But if I could, I want to do something that matters, something real." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and I could sense the vulnerability in them. It wasn't the kind of vulnerability that she showed the world. No, this was the raw kind, the kind that only comes out when you're truly alone with someone. "I get it," I said, my voice low. "I think we both want the same thing, something that matters." For a moment, there was silence between us, a silence that felt heavy but also comfortable, like we were both on the same wavelength, even if we didn't quite know what to do with it yet. Lisa broke the silence, her voice soft. "You know, Richard, I don't usually do this. I don't invite people up here. I don't let anyone in. But there's something about you. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I can trust you." Her words were a punch to the gut. Trust. That word felt like it meant something more here, something deeper. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe I could trust her too. I trust you too, Lisa, I said, leaning closer, my heart pounding in my chest. We sat there, just a few inches apart, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside had disappeared. Like it was just the two of us in this space, this bubble of connection that felt impossible to ignore. Without saying another word, Lisa reached out and gently touched my hand. The moment was quiet, but it was charged with energy, with something that was just beginning to take shape between us. The tension between us grew, and I couldn't help but wonder where this would lead. Was it just a fleeting connection, or was there something more waiting to unfold? I didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to find out. It had been a few days since that night at Lisa's apartment, and things between us had only grown more intense. I couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she smiled, the way she looked at me like there was something more behind her eyes. I knew something was happening between us, but I couldn't quite put it into words. It was like we were both walking a fine line, unsure whether we should cross it or stay on opposite sides. I'd told myself I wouldn't let things get complicated, but I'd already crossed that line the moment I stepped into her world. The truth was, I was falling for her, falling hard. I found myself texting her every chance I got, making excuses to check in, to talk to her, to know more about the person she was when she wasn't in front of a camera or on a runway. She'd become more than just a beautiful model to me. She was real. She was someone I could talk to, laugh with, someone who made me feel like I wasn't just a driver on the road, drifting through life. But there was something else. I wasn't entirely sure about Lisa. She'd always been guarded, and there were moments when I could see a wall go up between us. It wasn't something she said out loud, but it was in the way she'd pull back when things started to feel too close. It was as if she was scared of getting hurt, or maybe scared of hurting me. That night, she invited me out for dinner. It was supposed to be just another casual meetup, but something in the way she texted me, something in her words, told me it was different. I could feel it. This time, she wanted to talk about more than just surface-level stuff. She wanted to get to the heart of things. We met at a quiet restaurant, one of those places where the atmosphere is intimate, the lighting soft, and the noise from other tables fades into the background. Lisa was already sitting at the table when I arrived, looking stunning as always. She smiled when she saw me, but there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice warm but tinged with uncertainty. "I'm glad you could make it." "Of course," I replied, sitting down across from her. "You know I wouldn't miss it." We ordered our food, and as the conversation flowed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was weighing heavily on her mind. She was quieter than usual, her smile not as easy as before. She seemed distracted, like she was trying to figure something out, something she wasn't saying. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "Richard, I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About everything." My heart skipped a beat. "What about us?" I asked, my voice low, as if I already knew where this was going. Lisa took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me nervous. I'm scared," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've spent so much of my life building walls around myself, walls that I never let anyone break through. And with you," she hesitated, her words coming slowly, like she was trying to put them together in a way that wouldn't hurt. "I feel like I'm starting to let them come down. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I'm ready to trust someone again." Her words hit me hard, harder than I expected. It wasn't what I had hoped to hear, but I understood. I understood better than she knew. I'd spent most of my life keeping people at arm's length, afraid to get too close, afraid of what might happen if I let someone in. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers, grounding her, grounding myself. "Lisa," I said softly, "I'm not going anywhere. I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I'm here, okay? I'm here for you, no matter what. You don't have to rush into anything. I'm just glad we're doing this." Her eyes softened as she looked at me, a mixture of gratitude and fear in her expression. "I don't know if I'm ready for something serious," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But maybe we can take it slow. Just see where it goes." I smiled, the tension in my chest easing just a little. "Slow sounds good. We'll figure it out together." And just like that, the weight that had been hanging between us lifted. I could see it in her eyes, the relief, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this was something worth pursuing. The night continued, but it wasn't the same. We talked, laughed, and shared stories. The uncertainty that had clouded our conversations before had finally dissipated, replaced by a calm understanding that whatever happened next, we were both in this together. As the night came to an end, I walked Lisa back to her apartment. We stood outside for a moment, the cool evening air wrapping around us. I could see the light from her apartment window casting a soft glow on her face. And for the first time, it felt like I wasn't just a guy she met on a whim. I was someone she trusted. Someone she cared about. "Thanks for tonight," she said, her voice warm. "I needed this. I needed you." And just like that, I knew. I knew this wasn't just some fleeting connection. This was real. "I'm glad I could be here," I said, my heart full of something I hadn't felt in a long time, something that was starting to feel like home. Lisa smiled, leaning in for a brief kiss on the cheek before she turned and headed inside. As I stood there, watching her, I realized that whatever happened next, I wasn't going anywhere. We had both taken the leap, and now we would see where it led. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for whatever came next. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that this whole experience taught me something I didn't expect. Life doesn't always go according to plan, and sometimes the best things come when you stop overthinking and just let them happen. I used to think I had everything figured out, that I was fine just going through the motions, keeping things surface level. But Lisa changed all that. She made me question the way I was living. She showed me that you can't just wait for life to hand you something real. You have to take chances, be vulnerable, and trust in people, even when it feels scary. I spent so much time building walls around myself, telling myself that I didn't need anyone, that I could do it all on my own. But the truth is, we're all just looking for connection. And if you're lucky, you find someone who makes you feel like you're not alone in this crazy world. With Lisa, I didn't just find someone who was beautiful on the outside. I found someone who understood me, who made me feel like I mattered. She made me realize that it's okay to take risks, to let someone in, and to let life surprise you. The one thing I've learned from all of this is that sometimes the best things happen when you stop holding back. Life isn't always perfect, and relationships aren't always easy, but they're worth fighting for. So, if there's one thing I can leave you with, it's this: don't be afraid to take that leap. Don't be afraid to let people in, to trust, to love. It might just lead to something you never expected. And that's what makes it all worthwhile. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Before we say goodbye, if you haven't yet subscribed, I invite you to press the subscribe button. Your support, even if it seems like a small gesture, means a lot to us and drives us to continue creating content with heart. Don't forget to give it a like if you enjoyed what we shared today. Every interaction helps us grow and allows us to continue connecting with you through stories that matter. Thank you for being part of this community.